I love making knives. It's my passion. It's this medium of being able to put my heart and soul into a piece of metal, get all these organic materials together, and then be able to come up and craft a beautiful blade. If I couldn't make a living making knives, I'd make a living doing something else, but I would still make knives. I enjoy it that much. It's like a therapy. Hi, I'm Aaron Wilburn. I'm a master bladesmith. I've been a master bladesmith for over 10 years. I've been making knives for over 20 years. And I'm going to bring you on a journey on how I make the Damascus, the blade, and the handle, and the sheath for this beautiful Bowie that we're going to look at now. I like to use 1084 and 15N20 as my steel for Damascus. Typically, my 1084 and 15N20 come to me pretty clean. But if there is any type of oxidation on there whatsoever, then I take it to the grinder and I just cut off that oxidation, just cleaned it up. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then what I do is I stack them in a way so that I can manipulate the patterns. And then what we're going to do for this particular feather is have 1084 a ½ inch worth on the edge. That's what's going to give us the dark edge. And then the 15 and 20 and 1084 we're going to fold onto each other, and that's what's going to give us the W's. We'll get into that process more here as we go on in the video. Once I stack it and I manipulate it how I like, then I go ahead and I weld it up so I can put a strong handle on it. You can use other steels, but I find that this works really good for having a good contrast between the dark metal and the shinier lighter metal, which is the 15 and 20. Next, I soak it in my quenching oil. When it burns, it acts as a layer of soot that prevents oxidation into the billet, and which gives you a very clean weld. When my forge reaches full temperature, which is about 2250 degrees, and my material becomes a solid color, same color as the inside of the forge, then I know the heat is all the way through. Then I can take it over to my hammer and set the weld. So once the steel comes up to temperature, then what I'll do is I will go to the hammer and set the weld. And the hammer, because it's not a hydraulic press where it's pushing together on the steel, it's just hitting it. The steel is able to keep most of the heat in it. And then the hammer, especially this Chambersburg, it just draws the steel out. Unbelievable. It can really move some metal. This for me was a game changer, because now instead of spending my energy thinking about how I'm going to manipulate the steel or work in the steel, I can draw it out in a minute or two. So once the weld is set, then I'll go to my hydraulic press with my re-squaring dies and I'll push in on the corners. And what that does is it cups it and makes it into a C. And then when I draw that back out and I restack it, then we have W's, and that's the basis for a lot of patterns. So once the hydraulic press sets the C, so to speak, then it'll get drawn out on the hammer. And it will give you like a C on the edge. And then once we stack it, then it turns into a W, which is the basis for many different patterns that we use. So once I draw it out, then I go to the grinder and I clean off all the decarbonization from the forge weld until I get down to nice clean steel. And then I will cut it and fold it. And I don't fold it multiple stacks, because what we're trying to do is control distortion. So I only fold one fold. Now I have a stack of 2. And that way I'm able to have better control over the distortion that I want to put into the steel. Once I fold it, I'll take it back to the hammer and draw it out again, and then cut it, stack it, and forge weld it again. Right now we're at 2 layers. Clean off the decarbonization, cut it, stack it, forge weld it again. So now I will cut and stack it for the second time, which gives me 4 layers. Same process again. We'll grind it clean, cut it, stack it, and that will give us 8 layers. Now I etch the end to see how the billet is starting to look. So there's 4 layers, soon to be 8. That way I can see the dark edge, and it allows me, like I said, to have really good control of the distortion of the metal. What I do at this point is I solid weld all the way around the billet. That way it gives it a closed atmosphere. Now it's starting to get pretty critical. I want to make sure that there's no way that I can have any type of decarbonization on the edge, and we get a clean, pure weld. Anytime I do this type of welding, what I do is I go to the grinder and I grind off the weld. All I want it to do is seal up the edge. And that way I don't push a big layer of MIG weld into my Damascus billet. I will make sure that I leave at least a little pinhole so that I can get oil down into the layers to make sure that it displaces any oxygen. So we do the same process again, but this time when we grind and fold it, we're going to have 16 layers. And that's about where I like to be if I'm going to do a feather Damascus, where I want to cut and stack it and split it. So we have one more folding process, and then we'll cut it up into chunks to make a feather Damascus pattern. So now, as you can see, we are at 8 layers, soon to be 16. So once I draw this out, I see I want to have at least 2-inch pieces, and that's going to give me 4 or 5 that I can stack up and split. So now I'll cut these 2-inch chunks off. This gives me 4 pieces to stack, and then I will forge weld them together and split them. So now the billet is ready. We're going to stack them, weld them solid all the way around the seams, squeeze them together, and then split it.
See how that fits in there nice? If I want one more, it won't fit.
So now as I split the metal, I got to be careful to make sure that, first off, the cutter does not stick to the hot metal. But I try to keep the cut in the center. And I try not to worry if it's distorted or squeezes off to the side or diamonds on me, because I can re-square that. So now I have the raw material to make the feather billet. So we'll clean it back up, grind it off, flatten them out, clean up the inside edges so that there's no decarbonization on there. Cut it off the billet and then weld it together. And then we're going to forge weld this out into a square billet itself. Once I clean up the inside of the billet, I'll re-weld it all the way around, forge weld it together, and then square the billet like a loaf of bread so I can take slices off of it. So now when I take it to the hammer, once I have it all welded on the outside and up to heat, then I will forge weld it together and then square the billet. So now once I have the billet together, I'm going to see what I'm going to make from it. So I'm going to get a skinner, a Bowie, and a chef's knife, and probably a smaller skinner out of there as well. So stay tuned. We're going to have 4 other videos from this one billet. Once I have the chunk that I'm going to use for the Bowie separated, I clean it up and I etch it so I can see how the pattern lays out. Because this one is going to have a black edge or a dark edge. That way I know how to forge cutting edge and which is going to be the back.
Oh yeah, that's going to be kick-ass. You see the dark edge? Yeah, that's going to be good. Not bad. I'm liking it.
Then what I do is I weld a strong handle onto the chunk of the billet that's going to become the Bowie. Now begins the forging process, and this is something that I carefully, so I don't distort the pattern too much, I carefully draw this out into the form of a Bowie.
Get at least 9 or 10 inches out of it. Can you see the pattern? Now I'm going to start forging that edge out. It might be a little...
So once I have the material forged the way I want it, then I take it to the grinder and start prepping my ricasso and my tang area and getting it ready to surface grind. Now I go to my salt pots. It has a even heat completely top to bottom and brings the material up to temperature rapidly. Then I go through normalizing cycles, which ensures very small, tight grain structure, which makes for a superior cutting tool. And then, after 3 of these cycles, then I bring it back up to temperature and I will quench it in my oil to harden the blade. Now that it's hardened, the blade will get tempered for 2 hours at 400 degrees. So once the hardening process and the tempering process is finished, then I take it back to the grinder and remove all the material that does not look like a knife. Once I'm finished with grinding on the 2x72 belt grinder, I square up all my corners or edges on a disc grinder. So then the hand sanding begins, and I will typically start off with 220 grit paper. Take out any heavy scratches that are left, and then move on up through the grits, 400, 600, 800, 1000, and then 1500 grit. When I'm done with that, then it'll be ready to start the etching cycles. Now that I have the blade finished, etched, lasered with my markings, it's ready for assembly. And if you like this project, please hit that subscribe and like button because I have more content coming. Next, we're going to put together the handle. And if you enjoyed it so far, I'm sure you're going to enjoy the finished project.